They say traffic lights are the safety valve that protects us from road chaos, just simple rules that prevent the world from colliding. But on that night, in the forgotten outskirts of Gary, Indiana, I realized that a red light could be a death sentence, or a countdown to your disappearance from the face of the earth, in total silence. The clock struck 3:45 a.m., a time some call the devil's hour, when the world is at its weakest and the darkness is so heavy you can feel it pressing against your lungs. I was driving my old sedan, and the sound of the engine was my only companion in that terrifying stillness. I was returning from a double shift, and my body was aching from exhaustion, while the caffeine I drank all night had turned into a cold, chemical anxiety running through my veins, making my senses painfully sharp. The highway was completely deserted, as if I were the sole survivor of the apocalypse. Fog was crawling from the surrounding fields like a living creature, wrapping itself around broken lampposts and swallowing the asphalt ahead of me. As I moved forward, the city lights faded, leaving me before an endless black void. Suddenly, the tires began making an annoying sound, crushing something on the ground. I looked down through the headlights and saw that the road was covered in the remains of shattered glass and rusted metal pieces, as if a horrific accident had occurred here and was never cleaned up. Then, the intersection appeared. It was an isolated junction surrounded by abandoned factories and broken windows that looked like blind eyes watching me from above. The light turned from green to yellow, and instinctively, I hit the brakes. At that moment, a dead silence fell, even the wind stopped blowing. The light turned into a definitive red, a stark crimson red, and its light began to bleed over my windshield. I stopped. I waited. The rhythmic tick of my car's turn signal sounded like a troubled heartbeat in an operating room. Tick. 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 I started looking around. There was a sign that said, "No entry," swaying slowly in an invisible breeze, and its metallic creaking sound scratched the silence of the night. A full minute passed, and the light did not change. I felt a strange coldness seeping from the AC vents, even though I had turned it off. Suddenly, something happened that made my hair stand up. The 4 streetlights illuminating the intersection flickered simultaneously with an electrical popping sound, then went out completely. Nothing remained but the red light of the signal, glowing in the middle of the fog like a demon's eye that doesn't blink. And in the heart of that fog, just a few meters from the signal pole, I saw a shadow. It was an unnaturally tall man. So thin that his shoulder bones protruded from under his tattered jacket. He didn't come from behind a building, instead, he seemed to manifest from the fog itself. He didn't move toward me, but stood in the distance, his body stiff and his head tilted to the left at a sharp angle. He began to raise his hand very slowly, a jerky mechanical movement, as if his joints needed oil. He extended his long finger, which seemed endless, and pointed it directly toward the red light. He didn't look at me, and didn't try to ask for help, he was only pointing at the red color. At that moment, I realized the timer wasn't broken by accident. Someone was controlling this intersection. My breath began to come in short gasps, and I felt an overwhelming urge to run the light, but something inside me stopped me, an instinctive feeling that this light was my last line of defense, and that crossing it meant walking into a deeper trap. Suddenly, in the midst of this suffocating tension, I heard a sound from above me. It was a heavy metallic, scratching sound, a thick chain being dragged very slowly over the roof of my car, as if someone were sitting on top of me right now, preparing a shackle for me and the car. Time froze at that moment. I could hear nothing but my racing breath, which began to leave a layer of steam on the windshield, making the vision blurry and distorted. I stared into the rearview mirror, trying to find any logical explanation for the sound of the chain on the roof, but what I saw turned my blood into cold serum. Directly behind my trunk, in the area the brake lights couldn't reach, the shadow of a second man emerged. He didn't look like the first man. He was massive, wearing a heavy leather apron stained with dark fluids I didn't want to guess the nature of. He was leaning down very slowly, and with movements that were terrifyingly deliberate and calm. He was wrapping a thick, rusted industrial chain around my car's rear bumper. The sound of metal rubbing against metal produced a sharp screech that pierced my skull, as if he were sharpening a knife inside my ear. I tried to move, to do anything, but my body was paralyzed by adrenaline shock. I reached my trembling hand toward the gear shifter, but my fingers lacked strength, as if my nerves had been disconnected from my brain. Meanwhile, the first man, that thin creature pointing at the light, had started to move. He didn't walk with human steps, he glided over the asphalt as if he were dragging his body. He approached until his face was pressed completely against my side window. There was no distance between us but a few millimeters of reinforced glass. In the pulsing light of the red signal, I saw the details of his face that will haunt my dreams forever. He had no hair, no eyebrows, not even eyelashes. His skin was pale to the point of transparency, and his eyes were unnaturally wide, with no clear pupil, covered by a milky white layer like the eyes of dead fish. He began to tap on the glass with his long, pointed fingernail. One tap. Then silence. Then 3 quick taps. It was an organized rhythm, like a secret code he was sending to someone else. I felt the car shake suddenly. A violent shake that made my head hit the headrest. The man in the back had finished tying the chain. He began to pull it with his bare hands, using his weight to drag the car a few inches backward. My tires began to make a slight rubbing sound against the crushed gravel on the road. I grabbed my cell phone, my hand was sweating so much it almost slipped from me. I tried to press the power button, but the screen didn't open to the usual interface. Instead, a distorted black and white image appeared. The camera angle was from above, from on top of one of the extinguished lampposts. The image showed me my car from above, the thin man pressed against my window, and the massive man dragging me from behind. The camera was capturing every move I made in a live stream. I realized at that moment that I wasn't a victim of a random robbery, I was content. I was part of a show being produced at this very moment for those watching behind that screen. My eyes turned to the dashboard, and the warning lights began to flash wildly. The radio started working automatically, producing a sharp static, hissing sound, then the sound cut out to be replaced by a collective whisper, hundreds of overlapping voices speaking in an incomprehensible language, but the tone was full of malice. From the fog surrounding the warehouses, other figures began to appear, 3 or 4, emerging from the shadows like ghosts. They were carrying heavy equipment, battery-operated circular saws and hydraulic hammers. They didn't speak, they didn't scream, they just advanced toward me with a funeral silence. The thin man at my window opened his mouth slowly, and I saw no teeth, only an abyss of blackness, and he whispered in a voice like the rustling of dry leaves, one word that pierced the glass and reached the depths of my soul: surrender. The show needs an ending. At that moment, I felt the car being pulled more forcefully, and its rear began to drift toward a dark alley between the warehouses, where the director was waiting to end my final scene. The moment I felt the back of my car drifting toward the darkness, something inside me broke. Fear was no longer the driver, it was the primitive survival instinct that appears when an animal realizes it's about to be slaughtered. The sound of the circular saw behind me had started working, a sharp mechanical scream that tore the silence of the night, and through the mirror, I saw metallic sparks flying as someone began cutting the car's rear chassis. The thin man at my window was still smiling that black smile, and he began to raise his other hand to place it on the glass, as if saying goodbye. In the blink of an eye, I saw a massive truck appear in the distance on the crossroad. It was traveling at a maddening speed and without headlights, like a guillotine that would end this show forever. Without thinking, and without even looking back, I slammed the gear shifter into reverse, with all my might and floored the gas pedal until it hit the floorboard. The engine gave a protesting scream, and I felt a violent impact. The massive man holding the chain didn't expect this suicidal move. The metallic mass of the car crushed him between me and the extinguished lamppost. I heard a muffled sound, and the chain fell from the roof with a resounding metallic thud. I didn't wait to see what happened to him. I shifted to drive, D, and the tires screamed as they burned over the asphalt, lunging forward. I ignored the thin man who was thrown aside by the car's sudden launch, and I tore through the intersection while the light was still a deep red. At that exact second, the black truck passed behind me. I felt the air pressure from its speed shake my car violently, nearly ripping off my rear bumper. The timing was calculated to the millisecond. If I had been one heartbeat late, that truck would have turned me into unrecognizable wreckage. I drove like a madman, not looking at the speedometer, but looking at the mirrors. I expected to see lights chasing me or hear sirens, but there was nothing. Only the long black road and the fog that began to fade behind me. I reached a populated area about 20 minutes later and saw a gas station buzzing with life and travelers. I threw myself out of the car, shaking, my body dripping with cold sweat, and I fell to my knees, gasping for air. The station attendant approached me and asked with concern, "Are you okay?" So I pointed with my trembling hand toward the back of the car. The rear bumper had been completely torn off, and the marks of the chain were etched into the car's body, but that wasn't the worst part. When the police examined the car later, they found no trace of the gang at that intersection. The cameras were disabled, and the warehouses were completely empty, as if that city had swallowed them. But the detective found something that made his pale face grow even paler. Behind the back seat of my car, in a corner I don't usually reach, there was a small receiver equipped with a microscopic camera, and it was broadcasting a continuous signal. And on the back window, from the outside, there was a very recent Polaroid photo, probably placed at the moment I was stuck at the light. It wasn't a photo of me at the intersection, it was a photo of me leaving my house that morning, with a message written in frighteningly neat and organized handwriting. The text of the message: "You played your part brilliantly. Green means go, and red means we'll see you next season." I moved out of the state entirely, sold the car, changed my phone number, and even changed my facial features as much as I could. But the fear is not in past memories, it's in the present. Every time I stop at a red light late at night, and the wait lasts for extra seconds, I feel my phone in my pocket starting to get unnaturally hot. I look in the mirror and wonder if the thin man is still watching, and if I'm still that actor who hasn't signed the exit contract for the show yet. The bitter truth is that I didn't really escape, I'm just living in the intermission between two scenes. In the city of Seattle, where fog always crawls over the wet sidewalks, there was one name whispered in hospital hallways with much reverence and a little fear: Dr. Elias Vance. He was a surgeon who never knew defeat. He was nicknamed the man who bargains with death. For no matter how severe the injury, and no matter how low the survival rate, Vance would emerge from the operating room, calmly remove his blood-stained gloves, and say his famous phrase: "The condition has stabilized." Patients flocked to him from all U.S. states, placing their souls in his hands. But, behind this brilliant success, there were small, disturbing details, noticed only by those who looked closely. Vance performed his surgeries in the early morning hours, specifically between 3 and 4 a.m. Under the pretext that this is the time when the world is still, but the nursing staff spoke in secret about his inhuman coldness. The smell of his private clinic did not resemble the smell of ordinary hospitals. It wasn't just the smell of disinfectants, but it wafted a pungent odor, similar to the smell of ozone that precedes thunderstorms, mixed with a heavy metallic scent, as if you were licking a piece of rusty copper. Vance insisted on working alone during the critical stages of surgery. He would ask everyone to leave the room, claiming absolute focus, and as soon as the door was closed, a dead silence prevailed, interrupted only by the moaning of vital measurement devices. Years passed, and Vance suddenly retired at the height of his glory, disappearing completely from sight, leaving behind thousands of stories about hearts that returned to beating thanks to him. But the serenity he left behind was a fragile crust over a hell preparing to explode. In the winter of 2024, strange reports began reaching police stations in Seattle and neighboring areas. Bereaved families, who had lost loved ones years ago after a struggle with illness, began living a realistic nightmare. Imagine sitting in your home's living room, silence prevailing, and suddenly your phone lying on the table vibrates. You look at the screen. And you are surprised that the caller is Dad, or Mom, or my late wife. The numbers that appear are the same numbers that were cancelled or buried with their owners a long time ago. It wasn't just a technical error. The calls occurred in the middle of the night, specifically at 3:14 a.m., the same timing Vance preferred for his surgeries. Victims who answered described a voice realistic to a painful degree, but it sounded unnaturally tired, as if its owner were gasping their last breath, in an endless loop. The words were always the same, a sharp whisper coming out with difficulty. By the third week of November, the city of Seattle had turned into a scene of silent panic. The houses that witnessed Dr. Vance's surgeries were living in a state of funeral-like alertness. Marcus Williams was the first to dare demand an explanation, as the call he received from his late father shattered all his logical constants. Marcus says that when he picked up the phone, he heard a regular, ticking sound, similar to the sound of an old clock's hands, but it was faster and sharper. Then came his father's voice, dry, to a degree that makes you feel thirsty, as if the vocal cords producing it lacked human moisture. The psychological pressure pushed Detective Miller to make an unprecedented decision, opening grave number 402 in Lakeview Cemetery, belonging to Mrs. Eleanor Collins. The night the grave was opened was covered in thick fog. And the smell of moisture and rot was suffocating those present. When the cranes began extracting the coffin, everyone noticed something strange. The coffin was not cold, but rather warm, in a slight way, and there were faint vibrations transmitting through the wood to the workers' hands, as if there were a small motor working in silence inside it. As soon as the lid was opened, the forensic doctor retreated in daze. The body had not decomposed normally, but rather the tissues surrounding the chest were intertwined with very fine wires, transparent like spider webs, extending from the heart to the throat and jaw. In the middle of the rib cage, there sat a device made of a dark metal alloy that did not reflect light, and it had a membrane that vibrated with terrifying regularity. The device was literally breathing, using the gases emitted from decomposition and the residual heat in the soil as a source of energy. Miller realized that Vance was using his patients as lab rats for a secret project. It wasn't the dead who were calling, rather, the devices Vance planted were the ones making the calls, using the victims' bodies as human speakers. While the forensic doctor was trying to disconnect the device, the corpse's jaw moved with mechanical slowness, and Eleanor's real tone came out of it mixed with digital static. At that moment, the phones of everyone present vibrated at once. The system was recording their voices and preparing to spread its mechanical infection to new victims. After the night of opening the grave, Detective Miller led his team to raid Dr. Vance's mansion. The mansion is abandoned in the suburb of Bellevue. That smell attacked them again, the smell of old hospitals mixed with strong electrical charges. They found a secret path behind the bookcase leading to a vast basement that had been converted into a terrifying medical facility. The walls were covered with screens broadcasting non-stop sound waves, and shelves carrying glass jars containing human organs, connected to batteries and artificial pulses, making them move slowly. In the center of the basement, they found a massive computer containing a control panel with thousands of names, all of them Vance's patients. Next to each name was a light indicator. Green lights meant the patient was alive and the device was collecting data, while the red ones meant the patient was dead and the device had completely taken over the body underground. Vance's discarded journals revealed that he was obsessed with creating a living neural network, using human bodies as servers. The phone calls were quality tests conducted by the system to ensure the copied voice matched reality. Suddenly, the basement shook with the noise of speakers. Vance's recorded image appeared on the screens, to say coldly, "Death is a waste of information. I have turned them into musical notes in an endless symphony." At that moment, Miller noticed a new name flashing in orange at the bottom of the list, Detective Miller. His face turned pale as he grabbed his stomach, remembering a surgery he had months ago to remove a shrapnel. He began to feel a sharp metallic heat spreading through his veins from the site of the wound. Miller fell screaming, while his colleague's phone vibrated beside him. The caller was Miller, and his calm and mechanical voice came out of the phone saying, "The process has been completed successfully. The system is ready for expansion." It ended with the demolition of the house and pouring concrete over the basement. But that did not solve the tragedy. Vance disappeared, but his network is still pulsing in the bodies of thousands of the city's living residents, the device waiting for the moment their heart stops, to take over their voices and imprison their consciousness in a prison of wires forever. Even today, calls still arrive, but everyone now knows that the other side is just a digital echo of a body that refuses to die under the dirt.